Morning everyone. In this video we're going to revise the events and the key quotations in Act 3 of Shakespeare's Macbeth. As always, there's a link to the slides below if you want them. Now if we plot Freytag's pyramid over the 5-act structure of Macbeth, we can see that the exposition is done. We know who all of the main players are and their roles in the story. The inciting incident, which is the murder of Duncan, was carried out in Act 2. As was Macbeth's ascent to the throne after Duncan's sons fled. So now you can see that in Act 3, the plot will meet maximum tension before it starts to get resolved. So let's recap Act 3. Act 3 opens with Banquo on the stage by himself. He's speaking his thoughts out loud and lets the audience know that he now believes that Macbeth played most foully for the crown. He suspects that Macbeth was involved in Duncan's death in some way, shape or form. Macbeth turns up and they have a conversation. Banquo announces that he's going riding and Macbeth tells him not to be late for his tea at the big feast. And Banquo then leaves. Macbeth, now on his own, says that to be thus is nothing but to be safely thus, meaning that he's not happy being king until his status as king is secure, and we find out that he fears Banquo. Now as the witches prophesied that Banquo's descendants will become kings, Banquo and his lineage is now seen as a threat to Macbeth's throne. A servant brings in 2 men that Macbeth requested and we find out that they're murderers. Macbeth convinces them that Banquo is their enemy and also his, and that the solution is to kill him. And also to kill his son Fleance for good measure. Interestingly, he uses the same technique that Lady Macbeth used on him, insulting their masculinity, in order to convince them. He tells them where they can wait for Banquo, but that he requires a cleanness. The murder must not come back on him. Act 3 Scene 2 is where we start to get a picture of the minds of the Macbeths through their dialogue, as well as their change in relationship. The scene opens with Lady Macbeth. When she's alone, she states that it's safer to be that which we destroy than by destruction dwell in doubtful joy, hinting that Lady Macbeth, although she may try to hide it, the murder of Duncan is plain on her mind too. But when her husband arrives, she tells him what's done is done, and he shouldn't worry about things in the past. Advice that she gives, but doesn't quite follow herself. Macbeth says that they've scorched the snake, not killed it. Now obviously the snake is a metaphor, but for what? The throne? The great chain of being? The prophecies? Fate? Something else? Either way, Macbeth is shown his paranoia here. He clearly doesn't feel safe and secure. Very similar to the "look like the innocent flower" quotation from earlier in the play, Macbeth says, "Make our face visits to our hearts, disguising what they are." She tells him to calm down and he says, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." Another animal-based metaphor from Macbeth. This is a great quotation for analysing, as there's loads that you could say about it. Maybe he has violent thoughts, or poisonous thoughts, or his guilty conscience is attacking him from within. He's paranoid, and like the scorpion, he brings about death. Lady Macbeth asks for reassurance about what's to be done. What can we do? And he says, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck." Now this marks a clear shift in their relationship. She's not the one in power anymore, it's him. He's keeping her in the dark about his plans now. Whereas the previous murder, the killing of Duncan, was her idea, Banquo's assassination is all his. Scene 3 is a pretty short one. The murderers lie in wait for Banquo. When he turns up, they pounce. They attack and kill Banquo in the darkness. Banquo cries, "Oh treachery! Fly, good Fleance, fly, 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 thou mayst revenge." Fleance manages to escape, allowing the witch's prophecy to come true at a later date, and the second murderer laments that we have lost the best half of our affair. That's pretty much it for that scene. Then in Scene 4, we have the feast that Macbeth told Banquo not to be late for. Macbeth welcomes all the lords to the feast and the first murderer enters, telling Macbeth privately that he cut Banquo's throat, but that Fleance managed to escape. And this bit of news sends Macbeth downhill, and he notes that he's cabined, cribbed and confined, bound into saucy doubts and fears. He concedes that the worm that's fled hath nature that in time will venom breed, no teeth for the present. so Fleance is harmless for now, but could become a threat later on. The murderer leaves, and Macbeth turns around to see Banquo's ghost sit down in Macbeth's seat. Ross asks Macbeth to sit down, but Macbeth thinks the table is full. He looks at the ghost and says, "Thou canst not say I did it. Never shake thy gory locks at me." Clearly a reflection of the guilt that he feels over ordering the murder of his best friend. Now, Ross starts to think that the king isn't well, but Lady Macbeth calms him down and tries her old trick of insulting Macbeth's masculinity to control him with, "Are you a man?" She dismisses his vision of the ghost as being just like the vision of the dagger, just nonsense. And the ghost disappears, and Macbeth starts to calm down a bit, but then the ghost comes back. Macbeth loses it. He starts shouting, "Let the earth hide thee," and hence horrible shadow. Lady Macbeth tries to cover for him. She breaks up the feast and dismisses the lords. And he then says that he wants to go back to speak to the witches in the morning. And quite ominously, he states that he's so far into this river of blood that it would take just as much effort to keep going as it would to turn back. So clearly, he intends to keep going. And it's all downhill from here. Now, Hecate is the queen of witches, a goddess associated with witchcraft, sorcery, and crossroads in Greek mythology. In scene 5 of Act 3, she's furious at the witches. She can't believe that they would dare to give prophecies without her. And in the reprimand, she mentions Macbeth's selfishness and decides that he will come to know his destiny in the morning. She decides to prepare for the meeting with Macbeth by raising wicked spirits, and as by the strength of their illusion shall draw him onto his confusion. They want to give him so much self-confidence that it will ultimately lead to his death. In scene 6, Lennox is speaking to another Scottish lord. They're exchanging a bit of gossip. Lennox recounts the story of Macbeth's ascent so far, with Duncan dying, apparently killed by his sons, and Banquo dying, apparently killed by his son, and then asks what happened to Macduff. The Lord replies that Malcolm, the son of Duncan, is staying with the most pious Edward, which we know to be Edward the Confessor, King of England from 1042 to 1066, and that's where Macduff is heading to try and convince them to come to Scotland's aid. Lennox admits that that would be a blessing, because Macbeth is a tyrant. And that concludes Act 3. Macbeth had his best friend murdered, started with a touch of paranoia that quickly spiraled into madness right in front of everyone. We know that Macbeth is on his way to another meeting with the witches who plan to deceive him. Macduff is on his way to England to find people to oppose Macbeth. And even Macbeth's Scottish lords are turning against him. The stage is set for Act 4. And that's all for today's video. Like and subscribe if you found it useful. It really helps me out and lets me know what type of videos to make in the future. Thanks for watching, and happy revising.